You know, sometimes I want to say that to people who have no concept in Chinese.
Right. Hello and welcome to our.
They should 10, 9, 8, 7.
您是这个完了之后我就开始是
countdown.
吧？
They should do a
Countdown, yeah,
countdown,
they
should-
like
Oh,
last time.
Yeah.
So
老师们那个手机静音啊。
静音了。Mute your.
yes, muted, but not airplane mode. No problem.
哎，重新来了。
OK. Hello and welcome to our live streaming, A New Beginning. I'm Tuyun in Beijing. Here with us today, Ms. Zoon Ahmed Khan, journalist from Pakistan, who's also a research fellow with the Belt and Road Strategy Institute of Tsinghua University, and as well, Mr. Xu Qingduo, our very own commentator and senior fellow at the Beijing-based think tank, Pengol Institution. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we start our journey into this new year, let's take a look at the situation in Washington. The whole world is watching the protests in front of the Capitol building. Qingduo, I understand you lived there and worked there for 2 years, right?
Yeah, less than 4 years.
Less than 4.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. What's your first response to the situation there?
Well, I received a message like really early morning from an American friend. He's
Right.
basically complaining about Trump, what Trump is doing. But I didn't notice that when I woke up this morning to see the scenes basically occupy the Capitol Hill, Congress over there. It reminded me of what happened in Hong Kong, back a few years back in Hong Kong. There's Occupy Central. Central is like location of Hong Kong. Thousands of people basically stayed there for 74 days. And then there's the scene they stormed into this Capitol Hill by those protesters. It's very similar to those what happened in Hong Kong. Rioters stormed into the Legislative Council, exactly the legislative building of both the U.S. and Hong Kong over there. But of course, if you see the response from the national leaders, like from the Canadian Prime Minister, from the British Prime Minister, from other leaders, Western countries mostly, they would say they condemn the violence, they stand aside with the government. It's a sharp contrast to their views to what happened in Hong Kong. Everybody basically say, oh, the people have spoken, the government should cooperate with the people, basically satisfy their demand. What about the US, this is my personal opinion. This is not really popular with Americans, but I want to point out this. I see this hypocrisy over there. If there's something riot, really bad happening in other parts of the world, they often say, you can imagine if this is happening in another country, you would listen to the US leaders speaking basically, oh, the people is speaking out. No, the government should take into consideration of the demands of the people, right? You should meet the people, speak to the people, like what happened in Belarus and other parts of the world.
Yeah, that's what we got lectured every day during the Hong Kong.
Yeah, basically the
protests.
rest of the world,
Right.
being lectured
Even
by
Pakistan,
Washington.
we have had such
and now it
cases.
is
Oh,
happening
right.
in the US. I hope they somehow, they have a pause and think about that. And also you can say like the US spends decades basically exporting democracy to other parts of the world like Iraq, Libya, and other parts of the world, Afghanistan. Maybe it's time for them to take good care of their own country, nation building, not overseas, but in their own land.
Yeah, it's a very superficial way in which they try to influence the government systems in many countries. And I think you're about to say something, but I'll just quickly add
go ahead.
that it's also a question of addressing. If, for instance, in the U.S. there were Black Lives Matter protests recently, there was a 99% movement, Occupy Wall Street, and now these. I mean, they at least should have the humility to acknowledge that there is something in the system, there is increased inequality, there are communities that are marginalized, and at least acknowledge that and admit that they need to fix their system a bit. And I think that arrogance is something which is not compatible with the long-term interests of their society.
And they say it's the arrogance, not stupidity, that leads to chaos in the country or going backward. And I want to point out as well, it's American style democracy. In other countries, they've got their own style of democracies. You can't say it's not democracy, right?
It's a good point. It's like Fukuyama, American scholar. He wrote a book about basically the end of history. After the collapse of the former Soviet Union, they say all countries will finally develop into democracy, or let's say Western-style democracy, or U.S.-style democracy. But obviously, he basically acknowledged that that's probably a mistake. That's a premature conclusion. With countries like China and other countries, they follow their own path to prosperity, to stability, to peace, to smooth development over there. So I would say, every country is unique in terms of their tradition, in terms of their culture. You really have to give the people, give that nation the time to develop themselves. Right. If you are ready to help, you're welcome, but don't intervene, but don't interfere. I don't think the U.S. like to be interfered with their own chaos right now. But of course, violence is not good. I want to also say, those people, many people would say they are Trump supporters. They are extremist Trump supporters. But also remember, they are real, true American people. They have their voice being heard. They want to have their voice being heard. They want to say, they would say, oh, the elections are rigged. Maybe they are completely wrong. I would say they're probably completely wrong. But at the same time, they're Americans. Isn't their voice, somehow
meaningful?
Dismissed?
It matters. That's
exactly.
True.
Remember, Trump has won the votes, 74 million people, right? 74 million votes. That votes obviously count a lot.
I think it's also this, the politics itself is divisive with two parties. Both parties enhance the differences between the two sides. So they're eventually dividing the nation. But what I really disliked, even when Trump got elected in 2016 and now again, is that people who vote for Democrats, they try to reduce Trump's support to a very irrational minority. But that's not true. A significant number of people in their country is voting for the Republican Party. They did vote for Trump. So what is it that they're looking for? And I think we were just recently discussing how there is inequality, economic inequality. There are so many middle-class white communities that are perishing, that are becoming worse off over years. So these are issues that need to be addressed. And I think for any country, divisive politics can have very bad effects in the long run. In the short run, sure, governments can win elections. It's attractive, it's easy, it's an easy way to mobilize your support, but it's very important to work on national reconciliation.
That's true. Divisiveness inside of the U.S. is a big issue. I think, of course, people, I would say academics and probably American government will spend a lot of time to do the research and try to fix the problem, why the country is so divided. There are many factors, media, on the right, on the left, and also widening gap between rich and poor. As we said, the pandemic actually make the rich people richer, and the middle income and low income people actually poorer. How to solve that problem, and also the minority groups, like black people, communities, you can say, who suffered the most during the pandemic. It's the black community, it's probably other ethnic minorities over there. Issues like this, you have to solve it.
You have to face them. You have to firstly acknowledge that they exist.
Yeah, it's not that easy to, it's easy to talk about freedom, individualism, individual freedom and rights. But if you misuse it, you cannot go extreme, cannot afford to go extreme, otherwise there will be problems. But that will not solve this true problem in that country.
It also depends how you interpret freedom, right? And concerning the riots in Washington right now, I also want to quote U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who called the violent protests in Hong Kong a beautiful sight to behold. But I don't think I would say a majority of Chinese people here wouldn't do the same thing to American people. We're calling it a beautiful sight to behold in Washington.
But that's typical behavior of American politicians, interfering in the issues in other countries. Basically, they expressed their support to those protesters, the rioters in Hong Kong, the violence over there. So that's why people in China, we are not happy with interference because without the support, Hong Kong issues could be resolved more peacefully, in a peaceful manner, in an orderly manner. Of course, there are problems. Obviously, there are people who are not happy with the government. We should solve this problem, but the way to solve that problem is not through violence. It's not through storming into the legislative council, defacing all the buildings, the rooms over there, leaving a mess. That's not right. Just like what happened in U.S. Capitol Hill. That's not right, obviously.
As an old Chinese saying goes, do not impose onto others what you do not desire.
Exactly.
Right, that's from Confucius. And I think many of our followers would be more familiar with this golden rule, which goes, do to others what you want done to yourself. All right, sincerely, we hope the situation in Washington could calm down really soon. Back to our original plans for today. Well, at last.
It's the new year.
Yes, but we have to go over a little bit of the past year. People would call it a tragic year with so many stars falling, not only in the sports circle. You see Kobe Bryant, Diego Maradona, but also in the business circle, Jack Welch, and in the academic circle, the renowned American scholar on China and Japan, Ezra Vogel, right? So a lot of things happening, and not let alone the assassinations of Iran's top military high-ranking official, as well as the top nuclear scientist. So people would want to use a word to define year 2020. And according to a survey on our Twitter account, the word is challenging. So I'm not sure which word would you choose to define last year?
If I may.
Yeah.
Well, I think challenging is a very appropriate word because for sure many people we know right now are going through a third lockdown, a second lockdown. The amount of inequality globally has worsened. The pandemic has taken a toll. I think some countries in East Asia, China of course, have been able to deal with it in a very good way, in a way that people are receiving more normalcy in their daily lives. But there are many parts of the world that are still in uncertainty. People are not able to leave their homes. Suicide rates are increasing. Unemployment is increasing. So definitely people are still going through something that is challenging. All of that can take a toll on the healthy psyche of the people. But if I had to choose a word, I would say resilience. Because I think we would never have imagined a year ago that a situation like this can be dealt with. And as a global community, I feel the amount of empathy people have for each other today, you see small communities reaching out to each other in a way that they never had before because they're all suffering through something unprecedented and unique. So it does bring out a feeling, I guess, that people are capable of enduring much more than we thought. And that's why challenging, yes, but as a result, it shows how resilient we are as people. And also, we are closer to solutions to the problems that we thought we don't even understand back in March, back in February, and towards the summer. I think there was still less of an idea, how will we overcome the challenge that we're facing globally? But today we are closer to that. So we see that we're capable of much more than we imagine.
Right. Resilience, I think it's much more easier to spot when whole things are in chaos or when we are facing crisis, right? Xinduo, your opinion?
That's right. Yeah, I think challenging obviously is a choice for a lot of people. I would say that's largely the word, the proper word to describe 2020. When we trying to assess the impact of this ongoing global pandemic, it takes time, obviously. If you want to see something clearer, I would say, in particular historical issue, you need distance. The further you are away from the incident, the clearer you see. in many years later or many decades later, when we look back at 2020 or 2021, probably we will see a clearer picture of what really happened, what's the impact. But anyway, I think for a lot of people, in terms of their lives, it's challenging. You have a lot of challenges. For example, the new lifestyle, COVID-19 lifestyle, basically, you stay at home. And also it's tragic for the people who lost their family members, their loved ones. Of course, it's huge tragedy for a lot of people. And the lockdowns, endless lockdowns, create a lot of difficulties for people. Even for some people, you have your chronic disease, for example, you don't dare to go to the hospital because you are afraid of being infected by the virus. It creates a lot of inconvenience, a lot of difficulties for people's lives. But as one pointed out, resilience. We do see this another side of the story. And it's the heroes, like in Wuhan, during the strict lockdown in Wuhan for 3 months, and there are individuals who help deliver the daily necessities to the communities. They risk their lives, and the cab drivers to help transport people to the hospital, back home, etc. They risk their lives, and they trying to contribute to the normal functioning of the society. They try their best. They are really heroes. I would say that you can see the resilience
Normal
of the
people
people.
have become heroes in this situation.
Right.
And I think otherwise, today we live in a world, not 2020, but otherwise we live in a world where it's so fast-paced. We're so caught up in our own rat races at times that we don't know who's living next door. We're not able to talk meaningfully to our families even. But I was talking to some of my friends who live in communities in Western countries, and they were saying, actually, we have such deep and long conversations with our neighbors, and it's like a therapy session. It's like everyone is exchanging ideas, stories about their lives, and making each other feel better. So I feel like normal human interactions, ironically, have become more mainstream than they were before. So maybe, it's also a year when we start questioning what was the life that we were living? What should we tilt towards? Perhaps more meaningful conversation. Where are we going as a globe? We need good quality lives.
Quite thought-provoking. And our second poll, which news event in 2020 do you expect to be the most influential in shaping the world in the years to come? COVID-19?
COVID-19. What else? Yeah, it's not really. I'm not sure whether it's shaping the world, but obviously it's leaving this long-term impact on people, basically individuals, individual nations too. For example, if you look at the latest report by the World Bank, it worries about this widening gap between rich and poor inside countries like the US, European countries, I would say basically every country. At the same time, the gap is being widened between rich countries and poorer countries. For countries like in Europe, in the US, developed nations, they can basically print the money to save their economies. But for the developing countries, they can't afford to do that. So they will become actually poorer and less developed in that sense. So there's a lot of concern. I would say, in general, everybody is affected one way or another. Rich people, it's easier for them to survive, but for the rest of us, it's challenging again. So yes, it's. I don't know, not exactly how it will, shaping our world, reshape the world, but obviously it has some role, but it's still being played out, I would say.
Right, but fortunately, I think we got this global mechanism to make some adjustment, or at least try to seek this balance between countries. Say the WHO, they are distributing like vaccines or PPE to poorer countries or less developed countries. But unfortunately, we've got this biggest country or the biggest economy in the world withdrawn from that mechanism. So it poses some bigger challenge as well. But I think going forward, we are hoping that this situation can improve to some extent, you know, at least with China's help,
administration?
right?
Yeah, another administration.
Right.
Yeah, this is about international cooperation. Usually, during this time, this crisis, you need international cooperation, in particular the biggest economies, big powers, let's say China, US, Russia, India, European countries. They should come together to help the whole world. But unfortunately, you had a president, or you have a president in DC.
Right.
You remember Trump administration, what they have done, you know, during the crisis. They basically, seized the masks from their allies, the Germans.
And
the
said
Germans,
thank you to them.
and withdrew during the time of crisis from the World Health Organization. This is, you cannot imagine.
I have to, but I think, you know, I'm an optimist in a way. I think everything happens for a reason, and what has resulted from this uncertainty created by the Trump administration is that more countries are now becoming pragmatic.
Right.
So you have a crisis, a pandemic that results in an economic crisis for many countries. So they realize that they don't want to side with ideological or political policies, but they want to move towards more pragmatism. And also they realize that a country that should take so much responsibility is completely capable of electing a president who will withdraw. And even maybe countries in the European Union, Australia countries that would generally be very clear that, okay, you know, we have a strong alliance with the US, will now think, okay, we need to think about the welfare of our people. So you have deals emerging, you have new developments that you will talk about shortly, I guess, which would not have happened had all of this chaos not occurred. So maybe in the long run, you know, the impact of COVID-19 could be quite positive. And this is what I truly believe.
You're
I
actually
think
a
in the long
philosopher.
term- No, I really think so, because now the RCEP happened, the China
CAI,
EU, CAI. So these would not have happened had countries not realized we need to think about practical issues, not just ideas.
Yeah, in every crisis we see some opportunities right there.
Yes, that's the Chinese saying.
It's like every coin has two sides, right?
Right, that's very right. You're watching our live streaming from Beijing, A New Beginning. Before we move on to our next part of the new year, here is a reminder. You can tweet us whatever you think, or your comments, or any questions you want to ask right here, right now. And we got two very professional experts here that can solve your problems. So moving on to year 2021, we asked what would be the issue of most concern in the new year to you, Qingduo?
I would say that, maybe two things, if not one, here. Because of the pandemic, obviously is still ongoing. For example, in the UK is the third lockdown. The lockdown is supposed to stay there probably for quite a long time. People are talking about the end of March, so you can imagine how difficult it is for local residents over there. And also, even with the rollout of the vaccination, at least at the beginning, it's not that smooth. Either in the US, in the UK, or in the European countries, not that smooth. And the majority of developing countries still don't have any access to vaccination, to vaccines. Remember that. We should not forget about that. So this is, I would say optimistic estimate would be like in the middle of the year, somehow some countries will have controlled the situation. Prevented or cutting off the spread of the virus. Basic stability, probably life will come back to normalcy to a certain degree if everything goes smoothly. And then another thing I would say affecting the international situation is really China-US relationship. All the new US administration, many people are writing about the China policies of the Biden administration, what kind of China policy they would have, like whether they will continue to follow the practice for the Trump administration, which is very hostile, which is ideological, which basically, people focus in the DC, they want to have a second Cold War against another country. I would say the rest of the world, if you check, they don't want to have another Cold War. They don't want to get involved in this ideological war, like communism or capitalism or socialism. Let's forget about that. Let's be practical, as you pointed out. It's really about the people's livelihood. It's about the economy. It's about the people's jobs. If U.S. say, hey, we want to have a competition with China, fine, go ahead. The real competition, the real strength comes from within. It's not about stopping the rise of another country. It's about developing your country. It's about innovation. It's about technology. It's about investment. It's about building your nation to a better version. People feel happier. People feel safer. People feel more at ease. Feel proud of their nation. That's the competition. I would say, China, U.S. should engage with each other in that kind of competition, not the competition of, let's say, who has the big guns, who has the more military budget, or
what
who
is
has
that for?
Aircraft carrier, or blaming each other, pointing finger at each other. I don't like that. I think that's actually to the detrimental to both nations and also to the rest of the world. Remember, they are the two most powerful country in the world.
Yeah, that's the least desired for every country. And actually, Qingde, you've already mentioned some of our followers' concerned. That's job security. Jiba Melchia from Nigeria and Yvonne Kaur from Malaysia, they're all worried about their job opportunities in the new year. And some, personally speaking, I'm worried a little bit about climate change. This weather here in Beijing, it's unbearably freezing right now. Sitting in the studio, I'm actually shaking a little bit. People are talking about global warming, right? And some would question, it's freezing, and the temperature
climate change.
Right. But that's actually global warming, the result of global warming. I'm no expert in this area, but some expert explained to me that it's because the ice in the Arctic, Northern Pole, melted. It's melting, and the cold air going down south. So that's what's created this whole freezing climate here, or the cold temperature below.
It's also because yesterday was the coldest day of the year, so
right.
This is
in decades
in
Beijing.
It already broke the record today.
Wow.
It's minus 19, I think. So
last night minus 21.
Right? Really?
Yeah, minus 21. You would you feel like it's minus 31.
Wow.
That's according to people the professional. They would tell you.
Right.
You feel like it's minus 31.
Minus 31.
It's really cold.
Chill factor, because it was windy as well.
It's windy too. Yeah.
Plus the wind, it feels more chilling.
Yeah. I do think that climate change is a very important issue, and also because we have so many big storms and floods in developing countries as well who are not contributing
Extreme
so
weathers.
much. Extreme weathers that have displaced communities,
Right.
that have created refugees, internally displaced persons as well, and then countries just don't have the resources to deal with this. So it's a big issue, it's a long-term issue. But if we look at what's at hand currently, definitely it is COVID-19. I think, Qingde, I couldn't have said it better myself, that
Right.
it's just an issue that is at hand, and we're all pretty much as a global community trying to fix it. What the US pulled off under the Trump administration actually also demonstrated that no matter how big a country you are, you can be relatively isolated. If the US or any big country in the world chooses to alienate themselves at this point, then they will find themselves isolated in a situation as pressing as COVID-19. So I hope that we are able to see a change in policy with the Biden administration. But regardless, we have other major economies in the world coming together. The EU and China, Russia, many countries, East Asian countries, they're all coming together to try and solve the problems created by the pandemic. So let's hope that this year, mid this year, the vaccine can roll out in a more effective way.
Right.
It's a good point. You know, like climate change. You know, Biden, of course, you know, has already made the promise. You know, they will come back to the Paris Agreement on climate change. You know, like with the presence, the absence of the United States, European Union, China, they have played this leading role. For example, you know, I think in particular you have to give them the credit. You know, they are pressing the issue on every nation on their own, of course. And China, for example, President Xi Jinping has promised to the international community to achieve this new carbon neutrality in 2060. So China's carbon dioxide will peak in 2030. You know, following China, so Japan made a similar promise. So South Korea made a similar promise.
We set the trend.
Yeah, it's like the trend. So I would say this is very encouraging. And every major economies, they are promising to do what they can to help deal with this problem. This is a common problem to every nation. Of course, to island nations, it's more pressing issue. For example, Maldives and the South Pacific nations.
That are vulnerable.
You know, it's basically an island. If the rising the sea level, that could bring huge damage to the people, to the community, to the lives. So, you know, we have to deal with this is the common challenge for the human being. All the nations should join hands.
This is where I do think COVID-19 can also play a role, that it's such a sudden shock that we faced globally, that it makes us realize, you know what, borders cannot protect us. We face so many common challenges as the world that we need to be able to unite and work together. And COVID-19 can be an example how countries, how continents, regardless of how much they disagree on other issues, they need to come together. COVID-19, climate change, many other issues. I think it's time for the world to realize that we need unity.
Right.
Yes, no country, you know, however powerful, can deal with the issue by themselves.
Indeed. And let me quote one of our followers, his name is Sudra, is that I really hope all countries can put down their prejudice and strive to fight against disease. And unity is most needed right now.
Well said.
Right. And
yeah, unity, not uniformity. Yeah.
Right, of course.
That's it's a slight difference, but it's important, you know,
right.
Because there are, you know, people who think, you know, like it's like the end of history, you know. Our way is the way. Other nations should follow us. I would say, you know, like be supportive, trying to engage. That's fine, you know. Obviously, if you are an advanced nation, advanced in the sense of, you know, a stronger economy, maybe, sure, you're in a position to help. What about that?
But not dictate.
Yeah, not dictate. Instead of lecturing people, other nations, or telling other nations, this is what you should do, or you should not do.
Only what you do is correct, and you're in the waiting room of history. This is not the right attitude.
But I have to move on to our next question. Let's narrow down a little bit to economy. Which economy do you expect to, you know, grow the fastest in the new year? Zun?
China. I agree with our followers.
Right.
I agree. China, East Asia, definitely right now, it has so much to do with the pandemic. We know that before the prediction was a bit later that China could surpass the US economy, but now it's 2028, largely because of the impact of the pandemic, the fact that China was able to contain it to a great extent and the US has not been able to. So this development does affect a lot what countries' trajectories will look like in the near future, how much time they will need to recover. And in that sense, the countries that were able to prioritize stability and then look at the economy actually became better off in the long run. So China, East Asia seem to be quite promising. And I think some developing countries as well, where they haven't faced as dire impacts as some of the most developed countries have. So that's my take.
Yeah, I agree. It's very important to straighten out the logic first, right? When you decide which step is going to be taken next.
Well, that's right. You know, when we talk about the economy for 2021, it's really largely depending on the performance of containing the virus, right?
Yeah.
The faster, the better, actually. You know, I often say there are two models for dealing with the virus. You know, one model is like you prioritize saving lives. and then you end up saving both lives and the economy.
Right.
Another is you prioritize saving economies, and then you would find out you are losing lives, you are not saving economies. So I would say always do the right thing, probably people's lives. For the governments, you are there to protect your people. That's the true interest of the nation. And then lives and livelihoods, of course. So lives comes the first, let's say, and then I would say if you look at the World Bank report, they are concerned that for the next decade, basically starting from this year, it could be a lost decade for the whole world. That's really a grim picture, largely depending on the pandemic.
How we
react.
How we continue to react,
how we handle the situation. So the report talked about that. Also, I think there's a concern. If you look at, for example, the U.S., they're basically printing money to save the economy. It will work, but the long term, there's a big problem because 20% of the people, if you look at the stock market, it's still booming, right? Because of the abundance of the cash over there. And then 20% of Americans owns 80% of the stocks.
So
they will become richer.
Yeah.
But the rest of the nation, no. So there's a widening gap between rich and poor. Because of the widening gap, it's warned that there could be more nationalism, more populism, more extremist ideas inside the country. So we talked a little bit at the beginning of the talk over there. The U.S. What are the factors contributing to today's situation? Partly because of the widening gap between rich and poor. So that's concerning long term, down into the future, and also for the developing countries. They could become poorer, let's say, because of the pandemic, because of the inability to access to the vaccine. Look, which country is reaching out to help? It's China. China is basically working with Indonesia, with Turkey, with Egypt, with Pakistan, with Saudi Arabia, UAE,
Brazil.
with countries now in Nigeria. The Chinese foreign minister, basically they are talking about the cooperation on the vaccine. With the rule out of vaccine, hopefully they can control the pandemic, and then the economy will come back.
There's also this argument that China's carrying out some neo-colonialism.
Gosh,
But those are the only words we know. We've only lived in the world of neocolonialism, imperialism, hegemony. So I think that like you talk about Fukuyama, I guess there has been decades of propaganda, of academia, of media, of intellectuals coming out and justifying a leader, a global leader that must dominate and control and interfere. So this is something that we Asian societies with thousands of years of history and other parts of the world as well, we don't have this kind of a moralistic attitude. So I feel like the word neocolonialism is easy to use, it's convenient to use to delegitimize or discredit China because it espouses a very negative reaction in post-colonial societies like my own country. So many countries were colonized, they don't want to have another colonization. And imperialism also has a similar effect on people. But what China seems to be doing is multilateralism. Is not moralistic. It's not saying, oh, what system to follow, etc. It's more about taking a role, initiating something that has multiple collective ownership, like the Belt and Road. It's not about China dictating, okay, this is the BRI and this is what we're going to do. It's everyone deciding mutually, participating, evolving. So I feel like hopefully within a few years, with more countries, more parts of the world, more spheres of influence emerging, we will see that people stop thinking in terms of colonialism, domination, and can imagine a world where there's mutual respect.
And also, I would encourage people to check on the Chinese official stance, the foreign policy, the principles of
That's
Chinese foreign policy.
That's why I came to China.
If you
peaceful
big countries,
coexistence.
if you check the principles, China stresses very much about being equal, no matter large and small, strong or weak nations. Say we are equal. China stresses very much about the mutual respect. You know, for big powers, usually they don't talk about mutual respect. They say, you respect me, I don't need to respect
you. They say freedom, they just say vague.
But this is not the Chinese principle. And also remember, you know, if you check Chinese history, over 100 years ago, basically China was semi-colonized by Western powers. So I think deep in our heart, the Chinese people knows how to you know, communicate with other developing countries who had a similar experience. We know we don't like others lecturing us or dictating our affairs. So when I think Chinese diplomats wouldn't deal with other nations, in particular developing countries, they have abundance of respect. Respect their sovereignty, respect people's feelings, you know, being equal. You talk to them in a manner of being equal, to consult with them how we can help, how we need to do. This is our experience, you know, we need your help or you need our help, we can help each other, etc. So that's part of the reason why China is, I would say, welcome in Africa. For example, the welcome in Africa, Chinese investment is welcome in Africa. You know, remember this phrase like a new colonialism is from Western nations mostly. This is out of touch with reality, completely out of touch.
It doesn't apply, and people are still not at that stage yet globally, I guess, that they are able to fathom the concept of a country that can be strongest but not interfering. So this is going to be a new concept, and you know, you just mentioned peaceful coexistence. One of the reasons I decided to come to China to understand international relations was because their policy on Afghanistan and other countries was 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. Everyone choose your own path based on your domestic needs and requirements. This resonates with people who've been dictated, who've been attempted to, you know, taught how to study, what to study, how to evolve their systems. So this is a very important point, and also the fact that China could develop in these past 40 years, especially the previous 20 years, with their own system is very promising for developing countries who also want to be able to figure out their own needs. It shows that we don't have just one way forward, not just Western societies are meant to develop. Any society can, if they're able to put themselves together.
I think a very important criteria here is to see whether this aid or assistance or whatever you call it, investment or anything else, comes with any prerequisites or
strings.
Or your own sovereignty being hindered or undermined by other countries that offer this kind of aid or assistance. Okay, talking about China. Qingzhe, what would interest you most about China as we head into this new year?
I'm pragmatic, you know, economy, I would say. It's a very dull topic. But I think it's fundamentally important to the country, to our future, to the people, because the Chinese people overall are very pragmatic, right? You know that, I know that, you know, probably Zong also know that.
I know that.
We don't like, I think, you know, abstract ideas, you know, but it's somehow too far away from the reality. You know, for the people, it's really about jobs, it's about income, it's about the salary, it's about whether I can send my kids to the right school, whether my kids are being taken care of by the teachers, by the schools, whether the government, you know, is doing the right thing. The government is showing its care, is responsible, is accountable about the future of the nation, the future of the people. For example, during the pandemic, you know, whether the government is doing the right thing to take care, you know, the health of the people, at least the absolute majority of the people, right? That's part of the reason, you know, overall the Chinese government has done a good job, you know. That's part of the reason you see Harvard, you know, there's institute following the opinions in China for the past, I think, 13 years. And then they, you know, they talk to people, doing the polls, asking the people's opinions. 90%, more than 90% of them approve the performance of the Chinese government. But partly, I would say, it's the economy. The Chinese government has done a good job in managing the economy. I'm glad to see that, you know, people don't have this blind belief or trust in some of the textbook theories, you know, about economic theories. I think for the Chinese, being pragmatic is also means like being realistic about the reality. Every country is different. You have to take into consideration of your national conditions, specific national conditions,
Right.
and then to solve the problems, and then to lay the foundation for the long-term development of the nation. China has its own challenges domestically and externally for the
a big
2021.
country.
It's a big country. One thing I also want to share, poverty eradication. That's a big achievement. Over the past 80 years for the government, basically, one of the 3 priorities is always poverty eradication. And I think I totally agree with that. I think we should, no people should be left behind. However far away they live in the mountainous area. If you check that, people are isolated. Used to be isolated from the major big cities or the main society, and now they're connected. Or some of them happily enjoying the new life in eastern part of the nation. Usually the plateau area, flattening area. So it's easier for them to have a new life. So in that sense, that's the priority of the nation, of the government, is already the livelihood of the people. So that's why I care most about the economy.
Right.
I think that's very important for the Chinese people.
Yeah, that's a major issue, I think, for the entire world. And in our survey, green development stands out. But what I want to emphasize or point out is this follower from Pakistan named M.R. Shaukat, who said, I've read that in 100 years, China has achieved most goals that were established in 1921. It's remarkable and excellent. Obviously, he's talking about a CPC.
100.
Yes. His attention, or his interest, biggest interest is in CPC's centennial. So I'm not quite sure what Zun and your country fellows think about the CPC.
I think we already brushed upon this a bit, that whatever China has achieved, for example, just now we were talking about the eradication of absolute poverty despite COVID-19. This was also achieved. Socialism, keeping people, prioritizing the quality of life of people. So intervening where we need to intervene, as opposed to, you see in the US that inequality is never addressed in a way that it should be. So a lot of countries in the world, firstly, admire the Chinese government for being able to prioritize in a way that's good for the welfare of the people. So as a country, I think China sets that example for developing countries who have been told how to be, have been dictated a lot, that no, you can prosper being pragmatic, having a unique path forward, and respecting your own history and heritage instead of trying to mimic Western countries. So this confidence that China as a country had under the leadership of the CPC obviously resulted in a very good path forward, very positive development. And I think this sets a precedent for other countries as well. So this is definitely a lot of countries, not just Pakistan, many developing countries, many people in developing countries look closely at China. They're very affected by the Belt and Road Initiative. They welcome the Belt and Road Initiative, in fact. And I think I would say that if I were to look at China, I would say the Belt and Road Initiative stands out because it is linked with China's domestic development as well. The concept of dual development, that if China will develop further, the economy domestically will improve. That has a lot to do with to what extent, how effectively China can reach out to other countries and they can cooperate. Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, any country cannot prosper alone. And that is at the heart of the BRI. So the CPC's vision now to not only, initiate a vision that is inclusive, but also one that gives countries confidence to independently choose their own priorities, to de-link if they need to, is historic, I think. It's unique.
Right, and I also want to point out some misunderstanding, if you will, about this party CPC. It's actually not what some Western media or countries would think. It's one party ruling country, right? Because it's auxiliated with a lot of opinions and suggestions from other parties in this country. We got this consultative mechanism here.
Yeah,
right?
that's interesting. You know, a few people probably had, I would say, have enough knowledge about that. You know, or they often say, "Oh, there's no democracy in China. Or China is authoritarian, is a dictatorship." But no, of course not.
It's a different style.
The thing is, like, it's different style. Even you say the Communist Party of China, you call it a party. The party itself in Chinese language is different, actually, from the political parties, like let's say in the U.S. or in the European countries. You know, you have different parties competing for power.
Right.
But in China, the CPC. They have the party, they have a dominant role in this nation, it's written in the constitution. And also the party has the power, the government has the power, basically you can say absolute power almost. But remember, it's like a social contract. The people would say, yes, I would grant you the power, but also remember, all the responsibility, you know, we would hold you accountable for everything, basically, in our daily lives. If there's anything wrong, people to complain to the government, the government should be held accountable. You have the power and you have the responsibility. Yeah, so it's equal. So it's a different sense of power. It's all purpose. It's very powerful, obviously, but also you're held accountable to, immense amount of responsibilities in China. So that's a bit different from the Western sense of party being there. And also pragmatic, I would say. Though it's called the Communist Party of China, it's a very pragmatic party. Remember, China is much, much less ideological, or there's no ideological sense in terms of a foreign relationship in China. So when China deals with other countries, it doesn't matter whether you're a capitalist society, whether you call whatever society you have,
whatever you call yourself,
whatever system, it doesn't matter because we are equal. We are dealing with each other on equality. We are doing investment and trade, which ultimately serves your interests, it serves our interests. So that's a different style probably from some of the nations. You know, they stress very much about ideology. For example, today's U.S. like Pompeo basically blame us, the Chinese side every day. Cursing the CPC every day. Like it's a
very strong, like
very
dramatic.
Strong language, very dramatic about it. But the thing is, like, it's really about the outcome, right? Chinese people largely, they are happy with the government. They are happy with their lives. They're happy with the nation, the direction of the national development. I would say, yeah, that's very good actually. What's wrong with that? I would say if every nation is like China, that would be very good, right? That would be ideal in a situation. So in that sense, being pragmatic, for example, I talked to a scholar from Bangladesh. He's very optimistic. When the pandemic is gone, Belt and Road Initiative, like in his country, will resume all those projects with the investment and trade from China. His nation would be, the economy would be recovered very soon. Yeah. So he has high hopes on BRI. And also, not long ago, there's a piece written by the former Indonesian ambassador to the U.S. It's also former foreign minister of that country. He talked about that the U.S. side is trying to pressure Indonesia to join them against China. For what? For strategic fight. For what? And he's being pragmatic. He said that, China is helping us with the vaccine, and also our economic recovery after pandemic depends on the investment and trade with China. So that's very pragmatic.
Why should they not choose the welfare of their people?
Exactly.
What is it that the U.S. or any country, if any country has this attitude to try and just focus their attention to destroy the prosperity or development of another country, I mean, they should not have legitimacy in that end. So I think what the US right now is doing by pressuring countries, we look at the RCEP, there was obviously not a very positive reaction, but with China-EU investment deal as well, Washington's reaction is not one of a country that should be in a relatively leadership position. Why do they have double standards against their allies? Why are they, for example, pressuring countries to corner and contain China? We need to question this in a better way, and I think the fact that now with the dire circumstances that we find ourselves in 2020, many countries that would have been ideological realize that this is not helping their stability, their future. What's happening domestically in the US is another example. So definitely I think in a way, blessing in disguise, what China is doing can help more countries become more pragmatic than they would have before.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. And as most of our followers, they said, yes, I'm optimistic that things will get better in 2021, right?
Yeah.
Three of us?
Because they
I
can't
think
be worse.
Right.
Can't be worse. Yes.
Can be worse.
Can only get better.
Can only
It
get
can only
better,
get
right?
better.
Let's hope so. That brings us to the end of today's live stream. And before we go, I want to wrap up today's live streaming with a quote from a favorite author of mine, Alexandre Dumas, who said in his novel that all human wisdom is contained in all these two words, wait and hope.
Yeah.
Right.
In particular, hope.
Right. While we wait for our next live stream here, let's hope things can get better day by day in the new year. Right. Happy New Year to you all, wherever you are.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. Hopefully,
Right.
hopefully everything will get better soon.
Yeah.
Like with the vaccine, with better measures, how to deal with the virus.
Right.
Hopefully. Yeah.
I'm hoping that the weather can get warmer.
It's too bad.
Right.
It's too cold.
It's too cold.
It's
right?
really-
I'm shaking.
Indoors yesterday was just with heaters, everything.
Really strong last
Oh
night.
my God, I saw that.
It's
Yeah.
cold wind blowing here,
Yeah.
especially
that's-
on my
They say
back.
it's like since 1950s or 1970s.
I
This is
didn't
the
know
coldest
that. I
day.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
This is the cold. So it's like
Decades and generations.
50 years or
Oh
even
my
70
God.
years.
Right.
The coldest day in Beijing.
So tragic.
This
I
is-
could barely hold
Are we
myself
still on
together.
air?
Right?
Are we still
no,
on
they,
air?
they have
Mute.
like they will
Mute us.
fade
Okay,
out.
good. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's that. I
How
think
long
it's that.
was this?
I think about 1 hour. Oh my God.
1 hour.
Oh my God.
Right.
It's really long.
It was good. But I